John chapter 8, we encounter what might be what I'm calling the most dramatic mic drop in all of history. You may have heard that phrase before, mic drop. If you don't know what that is, it refers to a bold or definitive statement that ends a conversation. It's the kind of line that leaves everyone speechless. When a mic drop happens, you don't respond. You just pick up your jaw off the floor. Mic drop moment. So don't worry. I'm not going to do this at the end of my sermon, but you would take the mic and you would just let it drop. I won't be so bold as to do the mic drop at the end of the sermon today. Don't have to worry about that. But that's exactly what happens in this exchange between Jesus and the Jewish leaders. They're arguing with him. They're mocking him for claiming that he's greater than their father Abraham. Who do you think you are? They sneer. And in response, Jesus delivers a line that is short, shocking, and eternally significant. He says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." So the mic is dropped. The conversation is over. Except instead of applause, there's outrage. Jesus dropped the mic and his enemies picked up stones. Now, when you hear that statement, maybe you've heard it for the first time, it might sound a bit off. Before Abraham was, I am. Grammatically, we expect Jesus to say, before Abraham was, I was. That seems to make more sense. And it would make more sense if Jesus were just making a claim about his age or his pre-existence, his existence prior to the time of Abraham's birth. But Jesus, he wasn't making a grammar mistake, and this isn't a mere claim about chronology. The wording is intentional. And you look up pretty much every major English Bible translation, and it will put it the same way. Before Abraham was, I am. And so at the end, we'll look and see more clearly why Jesus said this. Why did he say, before Abraham was, I am, rather than before Abraham was, I was? Why did he say it that way? Well, in John chapter 8, we've reached the climax, the end of a long, heated exchange between Jesus and the Jewish leaders. Most times in the Gospel of John, when it says the Jews, it's not speaking of the Jews in general, but the Jewish leaders, the religious leaders, for the most part. And by verse 48, their arguments give way to insults. The Jews answered him, "Are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" Now, the Samaritans, at that point in time, they were considered heretics by the Jews. They were seen as people who corrupted true worship. And so this is a way of discrediting Jesus' theology. They're really saying that you are a heretic. You are saying what is not theologically true. And them saying that he has a demon means that they think he's either evil or crazy, maybe both. And so they're calling him these names. And as followers of Jesus, Jesus himself said that we should expect at times mistreatment. Sometimes we will be insulted. Sometimes we will be mislabeled. But Jesus shows us that identity, our identity, isn't found in what people say, but in what God says. People might say we're crazy. Might even say we're evil. But let Jesus define who you are, not the insults, not the wrong labels. Let Jesus define who you are. You are his follower. And as he was mistreated, sometimes we will be mistreated. Now, Jesus fires back by making three huge claims about himself. And what he's saying here is that he's greater than Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. Now, that might not really be our concern today. It was, their concern because Abraham was seen as someone so great. Again, the father of the nation of Israel. We might not really consider this question too important. Was Jesus or is Jesus greater than Abraham? But in making these claims about how he is greater than Abraham, we'll see that not only is he greater than Abraham, we'll see that he's so much more than that. We'll see what he truly believes about himself and what the Bible proclaims about Jesus, who he is. And that gives a whole new perspective to his life and his death on the cross. So huge claim number one. Three claims, we'll go through them one at a time. Number one is the keepers of Jesus' word receive eternal life. You can look at verses 49 through 51 of John chapter 8. Jesus answered, "I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death." So let that last sentence sink in. If anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. So this is a stunning promise, never tasting death. Now, of course, Jesus isn't saying here that his followers, believers, won't die physically. He's not talking about physical death here. He's talking about hope beyond the grave. For those who keep his word, who receive it, trust in it, who live by his teaching, death is not the end. As Jesus will say in John 11:25, "Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." And so he's speaking about a different kind of life, not physical life. He's speaking of eternal life. And the Gospel of John says a lot about eternal life. And what I've been trying to emphasize as we've been going through the Gospel of John is that eternal life is more than just the quantity of life. It's not just living forever. It's about living fully. It's about knowing God personally, walking with him now, and being with him forever. It really is the kind of life that God, from the very beginning, intended for us as humans to live. And really, that life doesn't begin at death. It begins right now. We can receive eternal life through the words of Jesus, which bring, we saw this earlier in chapter 6, eternal life. You have the words of eternal life, Peter said to Jesus. So keeping Jesus' word isn't just about agreeing with it. It's just looking in the Bible, seeing what Jesus said, and said, yeah, I agree with that. It involves living by it as well. And so we could look at our own lives. Are we keeping the word of Jesus, his teaching? What part of your life right now needs to come under his word? Maybe we're agreeing with it, but we're not living by it. Now, Jesus says we receive eternal life through faith in Jesus. And so I always need to be careful to say we don't earn our salvation or eternal life through keeping his word. But at the same time, Jesus says that those who believe, the Spirit comes to live within, and he changes our desires. And so we're not perfect, but we seek to live by the words of Jesus. And so after this huge claim, number one, the Jewish leaders are convinced that they're right about Jesus. In verses 52 and 53, they say, "Now we know that you have a demon, Abraham died, as did the prophets. Yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died, and the prophets died? Who do you make yourself out to be?" And so Jesus continues to tell them who he is. So, huge claim number 2. He says that Abraham looked forward to his coming. Look at verses 54 through 56. "If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. But you have not known him. I know him. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad." So we need to realize that Abraham lived more than 2,000 years before Jesus. Abraham never saw the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. He never saw or witnessed a miracle. He didn't hear the Sermon on the Mount, and yet Jesus says that Abraham rejoiced to see his day. So what does that mean? Well, Jesus is saying that his arrival, the coming of the Christ, the Messiah, was the fulfillment of all of Abraham's hopes and dreams. Abraham longed for the day when God's promises would come to pass, when the offspring through whom all the nations would be blessed would finally arrive. That's based on the promise in Genesis 12, verse 3. You know, sometimes we count down the days to a particular event that we're looking forward to. Right now on our fridge, there's a whiteboard magnet, and Lacey has a countdown to this coming Saturday when we're supposed to be going to Magic Mountain in Moncton Water Park. So she's counting down the days. She's looking forward to that day, this coming Saturday. And Abraham, in kind of a similar way, he's not counting down the days because he doesn't know when it will happen exactly, but he's looking forward to that day when the promises of God will be fulfilled regarding his ancestry, or his descendants, I should say. Now, he didn't live to see that day, of course, but that doesn't mean he didn't rejoice in thinking about what would come to pass. You know, we can rejoice in what we haven't yet seen. When we're looking forward to a particular day, counting down the days to Christmas or something like that, you know, we can get excited and rejoice even now, even though we haven't really come to that day yet. So we can rejoice now, even if God's promises are still on the way. In that hope, in that anticipation, we can rejoice. You know, we can sing about it as a church. We can be thankful. We can rejoice to the Lord for what he has promised to us, even if we haven't seen those promises fulfilled yet, even though they're still on the way. Now, we don't have a verse in Genesis that says that Abraham rejoiced over the coming of Messiah by name. But we do know that he believed God's promises. We do know that he had a faith that looked forward. Now, if you were to study this out, you might discover that some scholars suggest that Jesus might have had Genesis 17:17 in mind, where Abraham laughed when God promised him a son in his old age. You could interpret that as joyful wonder. I think realistically there was some doubt involved in that laughter. But when the child is born, he is given the name Isaac, which means he laughs. And the promise was that through Isaac's line would come the Christ. And so maybe it was doubt. That was the reason why he laughed in the beginning, but eventually, maybe there was some joyful wonder mixed in there. But after the child was born, after Isaac was born, he rejoiced in that God was beginning to fulfill the promises that he had made to Abraham. And so Jesus is saying that I am the fulfillment of the joy Abraham felt that day. His laughter wasn't just about a baby. It was about me, Jesus. We shouldn't miss the irony here in John chapter 8. The Jewish leaders claim Abraham as their father. But when Abraham looked forward in faith, he saw Christ. And when Christ stands before them, they reject him. They want him to be killed. Jesus is saying, Abraham looked forward to my day. And in some way, which he doesn't really describe, he saw that day and he rejoiced. And then finally, huge claim, number 3, and this is the one I started off with. Verse 58, Jesus is the I am. The Jewish leaders think that this second claim, really all of his claims, they think are silly. And so they say to him in verse 47, you are not yet 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? And so here comes the mic drop moment. In verse 58, Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. So Jesus doesn't say I was, but I am. And again, that might not seem to make grammatical sense, but it makes theological sense. And the background to this is Exodus 3:14. When Moses asks for the name of God. And in Exodus 3:14, God says to Moses that his name is I am who I am. I am who I am, or to shorten that, I am, which is really a form of the name Yahweh, which is the personal name of God in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew. And part of what that name means is that he is the self-existent one. He is the one with no beginning, no end. He simply is the God, the one who is. I am who I am. He doesn't owe his existence to anyone. He is eternal. I am who I am. And so Jesus isn't merely saying here that he existed before Abraham. That's really not his point. What he's saying is that he is God. He's claiming to be God. And we see the Jewish leaders' reaction in verse 59. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So the reason why they picked up those stones to throw at him, to really kill him, was that they saw this as really the greatest form of blasphemy, making himself to be God, equal with God. Before Abraham was, I am. Not just that he existed before Abraham was born, but that he is God himself. He is the I am. When we think about the life of Jesus, when we think about his death, that really should amaze us. That the I am, God in human flesh, when he was on this earth, as we see in these verses, he was called names. He was insulted. He was eventually crucified. He knew that would happen, and yet God was willing to come to live as a human, to be a human, to go through all of these things. And really we should marvel at his humility. That this is the I am. This is God in human flesh. And he is patient enough to allow people to insult him, to call him names, reject him, mock him, crucify him. And so this example of Christ, one of the things it should do, I believe, is that it should cause us to hate our own pride and self-centeredness, that we have God himself going through all of this patiently, humbly, something we're not willing to do so often. And yet he did it. And so when we understand who Jesus truly is, and this is really the biggest claim of all, that he is the I am. He went through this in such humility that we should look to him, and we should look at our own pride, our own selfishness, that me first attitude that we can have, and hate that in ourselves. And so when we think about Jesus, who he truly is, God in human flesh, the I am, that should cause us to really marvel at all that he did. Not just what he did here in John chapter 8, patiently talking with these men who thought he was crazy, but just entering this world to die for us. And it goes back to keeping his word and our attitude toward the word of Christ, his teaching, his commands for us. And the more we understand and think upon the gospel, the more our love for Christ should be increased and grow. And the more we should look at the Christian life and following Christ, not just as something we have to do, not just something that, well, I better do this because what will that person think if I don't do that? How we should live the Christian life is, I want to do this because I want to please and glorify the one who came into this world, God in human flesh, and went through all of these sufferings and rejections and died for me. And so it should really change our perspective on the Christian life, why we do what we do. It shouldn't just be an obligation, shouldn't be just done out of guilt or to please people, meaning just to look good, but to live for the one who came and died for us. The I am. Before Abraham was, I am. And so we're going to remember that in a moment around the Lord's table, remembering what he has done for us.